December 2017, Buckingham Palace. The Queen's annual pre-Christmas lunch, the one gathering of the year where the whole extended family comes together under one roof. And this year, it's a big one. Because this year, there's a new face at the table. It's Meghan Markle's first. Think about what that day was supposed to be. Not just lunch. It was the introduction. The moment the institution got to show the world it was embracing its first mixed-race member, an American, a divorcee, a woman of color, walking into 1,000 years of very white, very old tradition. A new, modern era for the monarchy, standing there in a room full of relatives. The optics could not have mattered more. This was the family's chance to say, without saying a word, "We welcome her." And then Princess Michael of Kent arrived, and pinned to her coat was a brooch. Not just any brooch, a blackamoor brooch, a piece of jewelry depicting a black figure, a style with a long, heavy, racially loaded history behind it. The exact kind of imagery that, on that specific day, at that specific lunch, sent precisely the wrong message. Of all the jewelry in all the royal collections, the tiaras, the emeralds, the heirlooms measured in centuries, on the single day the family opened its doors to Meghan, she chose that. She later apologized. She said she was sorry to have caused any offense, that the brooch was a gift, and that she wouldn't wear it again. And I'll grant her that fully, we'll come back to it. But by then the image was already everywhere. The family wanted the headline to be, "The Royals Welcome Meghan." A brooch rewrote it. And here's the thing you need to hold on to from the very start. This wasn't Princess Michael's first controversy of this kind. There's an earlier incident, years before, in a restaurant, that made this brooch very, very hard to wave away as a simple accident. I'm going to lay that out for you carefully, both sides of it, because fairness demands it. But not yet. First, you have to understand the trap the family walked into that afternoon. Because look at the contradiction sitting in that room. The entire purpose of that lunch, the whole reason it mattered, was welcome, inclusion. The family opened its arms, and the brooch, whatever the intent behind it, did the opposite. It sent the opposite signal. And the timing made it impossible to look away from. Here's the trap. The family doesn't get to control this message because the institution doesn't control what each of its members pins to their own coat. But the institution gets judged as one thing, as a whole. So one senior royal's choice of accessory overrode the entire collective gesture of welcome. Everyone else could smile, could be warm, could do everything right, and it wouldn't matter. Because the picture that left that building was the brooch. And the palace's instinct? The instinct it always has? Say as little as possible. Let it blow over. Don't feed it. Which meant that on the day the monarchy most wanted to make a statement of welcome, the only official statement the public actually received, the only thing that said anything at all, was the brooch itself. Silence from the institution. A loud, glittering signal from the coat. The brooch did the talking. So now we have to ask the uncomfortable question. Why? What was actually going on here? And this is where it gets genuinely difficult, because there are two doors out of this room, and I want you to pick one in your head as I lay them out. Because your answer says a lot. Door number 1. It was a genuinely thoughtless mistake. An older aristocrat from an old-fashioned world with an old-fashioned jewelry collection who simply didn't stop to think about how it would read. No malice. I just didn't consider it. Sounds gentle, doesn't it? Except look at what that door actually costs the family. Because if that's true, if the most senior generation of the royal family is so out of touch that it couldn't manage basic sensitivity on the single most symbolically important day of Meghan's entire arrival, then that's not really a defense. That's its own kind of verdict. She didn't think about it, is only comforting until you remember what day it was. Door number 2. It carried intent. Or, at the very least, a cold indifference, a pointed signal sent at the most vulnerable possible moment to the most vulnerable possible person. Thoughtless and tone-deaf, or pointed and cold. Those are your two doors. And here's what I want you to notice. Both of them wreck the story. Both of them undercut the warm, modern welcome the monarchy was so desperate to tell. So let me put it to you straight, and I genuinely want your answer below. On a day that important, the day the first mixed-race royal walks into the family, is she just didn't think about it actually a defense? Or is it an indictment all on its own? Tell me. thoughtless, or pointed. I read these and I think the split is going to be sharp. Now let's talk about what this actually cost, because it's easy to file this under royal gossip, a bit of soap opera about a brooch. It wasn't, because of when it happened. This was the very threshold, the moment before the moment. Meghan wasn't even married yet, and this brooch became one of the very first data points in what would become the defining question of the entire Sussex era. Is this institution genuinely, warmly welcoming to Meghan, or isn't it? That question would go on to swallow years. It would end up on Oprah's sofa. It would fracture a family in front of the whole world. And here, right at the start, was an early little entry in the ledger. A senior royal at Meghan's first lunch, wearing that. Understand the stakes for the monarchy specifically. The Meghan marriage was supposed to be the great modernizing story, the proof that the crown had moved with the times, diverse, open, relevant, ready for the 21st century. That was the story they wanted to tell more than almost anything. And every incident like this brooch chipped at it, chipped at the paint. And this one, because of its timing, chipped hard. You don't get a second first impression. And the family's first impression in the photographs included that brooch. And think about the audience for that first impression. Not just Britain, the Commonwealth. Millions of people across dozens of nations, a huge number of them not white, all of them watching to see whether this famously stiff, famously pale institution actually meant it. Whether "we welcome her" was a real sentiment or a press line. For those people, Meghan wasn't just a new royal. She was a test of whether there was room in that family for someone who looked like them. And on the day of the test, a senior member of the family showed up wearing the one thing guaranteed to make them wonder. That's the stake. Not one woman's hurt feelings. A whole watching world quietly asking a question and getting an answer nobody in the palace intended to give. Okay, this is the moment I promised you right at the start. Let's open it. Because here is what turns this from an awkward accessory into something heavier. Princess Michael of Kent had faced accusations of racial insensitivity before. Most notably, there was an earlier reported incident years earlier in which she was alleged to have made offensive remarks to a group of black diners in a restaurant in New York. That is the report. That is what was alleged. And I want to be scrupulously fair here because this matters. She denied it. She denied the account. It is a reported, alleged incident, contested by her, not a proven fact, and I'm not going to dress it up as one. So you're holding two different things in two different hands. On one hand, the brooch and the apology, that's documented, that happened. It's not in dispute. On the other hand, an earlier restaurant incident that was reported, alleged, and denied. Both sides. Always both sides. But here's why the vault mattered. Here's the knockout. Set that earlier reported history beside the brooch, and the innocent one-off mistake defense gets a lot weaker. Because the whole strength of door number one, the thoughtless mistake door, rests on this being an isolated thing, a single, unlucky, out-of-nowhere lapse. And the moment you learn there was a prior controversy of this exact nature, reported, denied, but there, the word isolated stops fitting. It's no longer one accessory on one bad day. It's an accessory worn by someone with a prior controversy of this precise kind on the most sensitive day imaginable. That's what moves it from oops to again. Not a conviction, not a verdict, just that quiet, uncomfortable word, again. And I want to be precise about what that word does and doesn't mean, because this is exactly where a lot of commentary goes off a cliff. Again is not proof of anything. A denied, reported incident from years earlier does not establish what was in anyone's mind at that Christmas lunch. It can't. What it does do is something narrower and fairer. It removes the comfort of certainty from the innocent reading. Before the vault, you could tell yourself cleanly, one off, no pattern, nothing to see. After the vault, you can't tell yourself that quite so cleanly anymore. The defense doesn't collapse, but it stops being effortless. And notice that cuts the other way too. The prior incident was denied, and it stays denied. It doesn't prove the dark reading either. All it really does is make both doors heavier to walk through. which is precisely why this one is so hard to settle, and precisely why I won't pretend to settle it for you. Quick thing, because this is exactly the moment to say it. If you want royal stories told this way, with both sides on the table, careful with the facts, no pitchforks and no fairy tales, do me a favor and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel. That's it. Now back to it, because we still have to be fair to Princess Markle, and I mean that. Let's step back from her for a second and look at the bigger pattern, because I don't actually think the most useful reading here is one villainous woman. The deeper flaw is something about a whole world, the aristocracy's insulation, a generation and a class so thoroughly cushioned that the offensiveness of certain old traditions, certain symbols, certain heirloom attitudes simply doesn't register. Blackamoor jewellery for a particular slice of that aristocratic world was just decorative, just curiosity. The racial history of it was invisible precisely to the people it had never once harmed. And that's the thing about extreme privilege. The flaw here isn't necessarily active, snarling malice. It might be something almost more revealing, a profound obliviousness. The inability to see how your own inherited world looks to the people that world was never, ever built to include. Princess Markle embodies it at this moment, sure, but be honest, the institution shares it. This is a family whose reflexes were formed in an age that never once had to consider Meghan's perspective, that never had to. And here it was, colliding with the moment it finally, absolutely had to. The brooch is what that collision looks like. Now the apology. I told you we'd come back to it, and I keep my promises. Princess Markle did apologize. She expressed sorrow for any offense caused. She said the brooch had been a gift, and that she would not wear it again. And I want to state that as fairly as I can. An apology was issued. That is more than a lot of royal controversies ever produce. Genuinely. Credit where it's due. But go back and weigh what an apology can and can't do, because the power of this one is limited by two things, the timing and the history. An apology after the fact for a choice made on the single most foreseeably sensitive day imaginable by someone with a prior reported incident behind her, it reads, to a lot of people, as damage control, as managing the fallout, rather than a genuine reckoning with the thing itself. And here's the quiet truth underneath it. The public tends to weigh the choice more heavily than the apology, every time. Because the choice, pinning that brooch on, that morning, for that lunch, the choice revealed the instinct, and the apology only managed the consequence. Contrition after a completely avoidable act will always persuade less than simply not committing the act. That's not cynicism. That's just how people read remorse. We watch what you did before you got caught, not what you said after. So let's name the real hypocrisy at the heart of this plainly. The monarchy wanted Meghan's arrival to prove it had finally entered the modern, diverse age. And at the very lunch that welcomed her, a senior royal wore a piece of jewelry from a tradition the modern age had already condemned. That's it. That's the whole thing in one breath. The distance between the institution's aspiration and its instincts. A family that desperately wanted to broadcast, "We've changed," undercut, in a single accessory, by a member who broadcast, "Some of us haven't." The welcome and the brooch, in the same room, on the same afternoon, telling two completely opposite stories. And you don't get to pick which one the cameras keep. So where did all of this leave people? Let's actually walk the room, because that's the part that lingers. Meghan. At her very first family gathering, the moment she's meant to be folded in, made welcome, handed instead an early, quiet sign of the establishment's discomfort. Now, I want to be careful here because I can't tell you exactly what was in her head that day, and I won't pretend to. But it's a reasonable inference, a fair one, that a moment like this doesn't pass unnoticed by the person it lands nearest to. And we know that the broader feeling of not being fully welcome later became a central part of how the Sussexes described those years. This brooch sits early in that story. Draw your own line. Princess Markle. Apologizing, yes, but marked. Her prior reported history dragged back up into the daylight, re-examined, relitigated, whether it was fair or not. And the institution itself, unable to fully disown a senior member's private choice, yet damaged by it all the same, isolated in that gap, the gap between the family it so badly wanted to be and the family that actually showed up to lunch that day. The brooch became a small, glittering symbol of a much larger loneliness, a new member walking into a world that wasn't quite ready to make room for her, at the very meal that was meant to make room. And here's the part that can't be undone. The image exists, permanently. The brooch was worn, it was photographed, it was folded into the historical record of Meghan's arrival forever. And no apology untakes a photograph. You can retire the brooch, you can express your sorrow, you can say it'll never happen again, but the picture is already in the archive, and it always will be. So let me leave you where I have to leave you, honest and on the fence, exactly where I think an honest person should be. Princess Michael apologized, and I'll grant that fully one more time. She said sorry, she called it a gift, she retired the brooch. That's real, and I won't take it from her. But she wore it, to the one lunch on earth where its meaning was most obvious, with a prior reported controversy already behind her, and the palace, as ever, said almost nothing at all. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you she is racist. I don't know what was in her heart that morning, and neither do you, and anyone who claims they do is selling you something. So I'm holding it honestly. Both possibilities on the table, equal weight. It was either a genuinely innocent, thoughtless mistake, or it was the moment the family's oldest instincts showed up, pinned to a coat, on the worst possible day. I can build you a real case for each. I can't close the door either. So that's my question for you, and I want your answer below, and I want it fairly, both sides weighed. An innocent mistake, or the oldest instincts of an old institution made visible for one afternoon? Tell me where you land, and be honest with yourself about why. Because this brooch is only one thread. If you want to see how deep this race and the establishment story actually runs, there's a much bigger one waiting. The fight over what to call Archie and Lilibet. The titles, the questions about who in that family gets to be a prince or a princess, and who quietly doesn't. That's where this pattern stops being about one brooch on one coat and starts being about the machinery of the whole institution. That one's waiting for you right here. I'll see you in it.